Hi, boys and girls. This is Ms. Kathy. I'm so happy you've joined me today for another story just for you. God's plan for Sammy. Do you think Joseph was happy living in Egypt? The shoebox kids stared at Mrs. Shue. For a minute, no one had an answer. Then Chris raised his hand. I think he was. Well, after he got out of jail and everything. I think so too, Dee Dee added. He was rich and famous, and everyone but Pharaoh had to do whatever he said. Jenny agreed, and he got married and had a family. I'm sure he was happy. Sammy didn't think so. Joseph couldn't be with his father, he thought. He must have missed him. But he didn't say it out loud. I'm sure, Mrs. Shue said, that God didn't want Joseph to grow up alone in Egypt. He knew Joseph would have been happy to stay with his family. But God still let Joseph be sold to Egypt, Sammy thought. He turned and stared out the open window. It was a warm, sunny day, perfect for the church picnic by the lake. The lesson went on, but Sammy didn't hear Mrs. Shue's voice. Something outside caught his attention. It kept moving. It's a baby bird, Sammy decided. It must have fallen out of a nest in that tree. As Sammy watched, the bird hopped back and forth under the tree. He could barely hear its cheep, cheep as it called to its parents. I hope you'll be okay, Hoppy, he thought. Before Sabbath school ended, the bird had disappeared under a bush. Sammy wondered about it as he sat beside his grandparents during church. Don't forget about our picnic right after church today, Pastor Hill announced. Let's all join our church family out by the lake to share a meal together. Sammy sang and listened with everyone else, but the baby bird kept popping up in his mind. I wonder if Hoppy has found his parents yet. Sammy wanted to be the first one outside when church was over, but he knew it wouldn't happen. Grandfather's leg hurts today, so he's walking slow. We'll wait and walk out after everyone else has passed. When the church service ended, Sammy sat quietly as the other people moved to the door. Finally, his grandfather stood slowly. Sammy, you go first, he said. Sammy tried not to rush too far ahead, but as soon as his grandparents stopped to talk, he slipped behind Pastor Hill and headed for the door. Under the shoebox window, Sammy stopped to look and listen. He heard kids shouting down by the lake. He heard a car door slam in the parking lot. Then he heard something else. Cheep, cheep. The sound came from under a bush beside the church. Hoppy, you're still here, he whispered. Then he laid flat on the ground and peered under the bush's low branches. Suddenly he heard a voice. What are you doing down there? Sammy looked up. Oh, hi, Jenny. There's a baby bird under this bush. It can't fly, but it's calling its parents. Jenny had already changed into her picnic clothes. She dropped down beside Sammy. It looks like a robin. I wonder where the parent birds are. As Sammy and Jenny watched, the bird hopped out from under the bush and away from them. Go, Hoppy, Sammy whispered. Find your parents. Hoppy led them farther from the church and closer to the picnic by the lake. When the bird disappeared under a tree's low branches, Sammy called, I'll be back to check on you later. Hey, Sammy, Chris called from the picnic table. Watch this. Chris tossed a black olive up into the air and caught it in his mouth. I never miss, he shouted. How could you miss with a mouth that big? Maria shouted back. Sammy laughed and joined them for lunch. Soon everything was eaten. Let's go for a hike around the lake, Chris suggested. I'll race you all, Willie shouted. Come on, you know we have to ask our parents first, Jenny reminded them. When the parents heard about it, they decided to go too. All the parents, that is, except Sammy's. My leg hurts too much for that kind of trip, Grandfather said when Sammy asked. We'll just sit right here in the sunshine, Grandmother said in agreement. I'm too tired for a hike. You go on and have a good time, Sammy. Sammy followed his friends along the path, but he wasn't shouting and laughing like they were. He walked more slowly, alone at the back of the group. Mrs. Shue slowed down to walk beside him. Sammy, it's too nice a day for someone like you to look sad. What's wrong? Sammy scuffed his shoes on the path. Look how much fun everyone is having with their parents. Everyone but me. Your grandparents couldn't come? Grandfather's leg hurts too much, and Grandmother was too tired. Sammy looked up. I know they're older than everyone else's parents. I just wish my parents were alive. I wish they were around to do things with me. Mrs. Shue was quiet for a minute. Then she said, Sammy, do you remember what our lesson taught us today? Sammy nodded. that Joseph was happy in Egypt, but I don't think he really was. He was stuck away from his father and didn't know if he would ever see him again. Are you sure you listened to the whole lesson? Mrs. Shue asked. Joseph wasn't happy to be in Egypt. He wanted to be home where he could do things with his father, but he decided that God would work things out for the best, and God did. Because Joseph was in Egypt, he was able to save his family from the famine. Sammy thought about it. So you think God is working on a plan for my life, even though my parents are gone? Mrs. Shue nodded. God didn't want your parents to die, and he didn't want you to be without them. But since they did, he's working on a special plan for your life without them. Sammy smiled. He kind of liked that idea. Thanks, Mrs. Shue, he called as he ran to join the others as they got close to the picnic site. Then off to the side, he heard a sound. Cheep! Pounding to a stop, he saw Hoppy beside a tree. On the lowest branch of the tree was an adult robin. Cheep! Hoppy called again. The adult robin hopped down and put a worm in Hoppy's mouth. I'm glad you found your parents, Sammy whispered. I think I'll be okay without mine, since God has a special plan.
The story you have heard today is from the Shoebox Kids Bible Stories, written by Jerry D. Thomas and used with permission from the Pacific Press Publishing Association. If you're interested in any other books published by the Seventh-day Adventist Church, please visit AdventistBookCenter.com or call 1-800-765-6955.
This podcast is a production of the Carolina Conference of the Seventh-day Adventist Church.